Welcome everybody to First Responder Friday. We have a really good setup today. We're going to talk about are you here to help somebody in crisis? And we had three initially set up. We actually invited a fourth person today, but our initial three are going to be Janet Warner, Dr. Calvin Chatlos, and then Carlito. And is it Cavalin? Is that right, Carlito? Okay,
Yep,
I
that's
want to
fine.
make sure I always guess when I pronounce your name, but you're never here for me to ask initially. So I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it right. And we're going to talk about what does help look like and what does that mean for somebody that's in crisis. So why that's so important is because, when we have our first responders and we're dealing with people in crisis, we're often talking about de-escalation and those type of things. And we want to talk about, building rapport and trust and those type of things, but it's going to be really easy when we talk about that word help and what does that look like. So that H is going to be talking about things like humbling ourselves, and that E is empathizing with people that might be in crisis. That L means listening, right? And that last piece is that P is that patience, and that's key. So we're going to bring those pieces of the puzzle together. And every day we talk about people in this country are in crisis. And this group is talking about this Aware Project, which is we are looking for, are we aware of religious and spiritual experiences? And we're bringing this whole puzzle together. And it says, regardless of the crisis being experienced, it's important to understand that the individuals are struggling, that they're in this together, and they're human, and that they deserve to be understood, and that they deserve empathy. And they deserve compassion to be given to them regardless of what they're going through. And we're going to look today about, understanding that when people are in crisis, we don't need to know every single thing about what they're going through, but we're going to give you some skills and some tools to be able to get to that place sooner with them, and to help understand their situation a little bit, faster, if you will. And our first responders need this help, but anyone can really get this help, right? And these individuals today that you're going to be that you're going to be getting the information from are working on a huge project. And Janet and Dr. Chatlos and Carlito, I want you guys to really give the individuals that are attending this training today, I want you to give them the idea here about your project in general, not just what we're talking about today with the help, but what Aware is, and really set the tone, because some of them have not been on here before. So I want them to understand what you guys are doing big picture out there in New Jersey, and what you look to do nationwide in addition to the training today. So I'm going to turn this over to you guys. And at the end, we're going to have time for questions. And I want you to introduce your special guest, Emily, as well today, that you brought on last minute. Thank you very much.
You're gorgeous. Thank you, Dr. Olivia. This is part 3. We've done 2 other previous sessions on this topic. And I thank you for returning, and for anybody that's joining us new. We are going to reintroduce Dr. Calvin Chatlos, who is from New Jersey, and he is a practicing psychiatrist who will do some briefing on where did we leave off in July and where are we going. Carlito is also from New Jersey, crisis counselor, and he will speak very specifically hands-on with crisis counseling and how does the help model work. We will have Emily from California, who has had an experience just in 2023 with 988 when she called for help. I will then also preface it with my 911 call in 2005. So we're going to make this very practical and entertain questions as we go along. So the agenda is like this. In a moment, we'll have Dr. Chatlos give us a few briefings. If you didn't see the July 12th session, please go look at it, but Dr. Chatlos will preview it. We'll look at what does the HELP model look like. It's very simplistic, but it works. And you're going to hear from Emily and myself of how it could have worked and how it could work. We are going to talk through the help guidelines with Carlito and Dr. Chatlos, but that's when we're going to actually midpoint ask questions and have a conversation. We don't have to wait to the end. And then we'll close with our next steps. How are we moving this forward across the United States? So, Dr. Chatlos, please introduce yourself and give us a little review of where we were in July.
Sure. Mm, I'm Dr. Chatlis. I'm an addiction psychiatrist in New Jersey. I'm affiliated with Rutgers University, Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. And beginning with aware, are we aware of religious experience? We realized last time that we started in with information before we set some of the background. So I want to set some background today because as soon as when we're looking at and what we're going to be talking about is more what we would call spiritual emergencies rather than religious emergencies. So I want to start just with some definitions so you know our language. When we say religion here, we're talking about the institutional aspects of beliefs, practices as held by a group. Spirituality is a personal experience that is related to the sacred or ultimate reality, meaning, and purpose. And in research, there's also a term religiousness or religiosity. And these are people that may practice some spiritual practice that aren't associated with a specific religion, like somebody may do yoga but not be Hindu. They may pray and not identify with Christianity. They may meditate and not identify with Buddhism. And the reason we do this is we are finding people are having experiences that are spiritual experiences that are being misinterpreted because, and we'll talk about how a spiritual experience may move into a spiritual emergency. And I think, Janet, you want to move that ahead?
Yeah.
Um, so when we're talking about spirituality, there are many definitions. I'm going to use this one real quickly. It's the quality of the relationship to whomever or whatever is most important or supreme in life. And basically, what this identifies is that it's a quality in a relationship to some sort of supreme beliefs or a higher power or God or the divine, depending on your background. And there are experiences associated with it that are very familiar. There's a connectedness and energy with the experience. There's a sense of wholeness, and there's usually some sense of serenity and joy. And I think we're missing one of the other ones. There's usually a new meaning and purpose. And this is not been recognized so that as we're looking at first responders, there can be things like, and this is what we mean, when our spiritual core opens, it is a non-ordinary experience that people can have that can look like psychosis, it can look like mental disorders, but it isn't. And there's usually an energetic, ecstatic mood, some idea that this is true and I have to follow it. There may be hallucinations, though they aren't very unusual. They may have delusions, connection with a higher power, with God. They may even be connected with mythology, whatever. But with a spiritual experience, the thought is not so disorganized. They can still carry on a conversation and tell you what happened. There aren't any cognitive disabilities, and very, very rarely does a spiritual experience get connected with suicidal or homicidal ideation. And we know that's the number one thing when first responders come, but that is very rare. And a spiritual experience, because it's unusual, it's maybe frightening, it may progress to what we would call a spiritual crisis, where the person starts to get worried or afraid. And then there's, oh my God, what am I? What is going on? I'm going crazy. And it becomes a spiritual emergency. And our concern is it can be misdiagnosed as a medical or mental disorder. And we're just trying to do this to bring awareness. The Manual for Mental Disorders, you may be familiar, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, minimally even talks about this. I think there's more to it. There is a single code that isn't even a diagnosis. It's a condition or problem that may be a focus of clinical attention, called religious or spiritual problems. So there's some recognition by the mental health field, but very minimal that these experiences even occur. Now, there's some new news, Janet. I'm going to give them. Oh, you want me to do this one?
Yeah. Just for a
Okay.
moment. Yeah.
So I mentioned that a spiritual experience may progress to a spiritual crisis, but then a spiritual emergency. And this is a definite experience that has been studied and understood to some degree. And one of the pieces of a spiritual emergency, let's say, so a spiritual emergency has symptoms that may be extreme, but they're not a mental disorder. Now, no, go back. One of the
Yeah. I don't
parts
know if I can go
about
back, but that's okay.
one of the
Sorry.
parts, well,
I'm gonna
I'll
stop.
talk while you're
Keep
doing
going.
that.
Keep going.
One of the parts about spirituality and spiritual experience is especially relevant for first responders. First responders see horrors. They see things, they are part of things, they may even be in situations where they do things, and it can develop into post-traumatic stress disorder. One of the things we're realizing about PTSD that doesn't get treated is what we call moral emergency. We have a moral core that's almost gut wired in, that when something happens that violates our internal moral core, we react emotionally and our whole body reacts. This is what we call a moral injury. Fortunately, it looks like psychiatry and the American Psychiatric Association may be moving to add what we call moral injury to the DSM in that V code. And the terms, it's right before the steering committee, I think as of today, and we'll find out by next week. But again, it's the same sort of thing that first responders and others may experience as a moral dilemma, but it may be more than a moral dilemma. It may become a crisis. I had to do something that is absolutely against who I am. And when it really hits the heart and the soul and the real depth of our morality, it becomes a moral injury. So we just wanted to introduce these terms because they are beginning to play more of a role in first responders' work so that there's some understanding. And I think that pretty much takes care of what I need to explain, right, Janet?
It does. And if everybody's watching what I'm doing behind, I am so not technical. And we'll just deal with me. All right. So that brings us up to where we left in July and where we are now. And
I
don't
can
know,
take
give me
over if you want, Janet.
Oh, please. Yes. Please do that. So what was exciting about what Dr. Chatlow said is where we left off in July, that moral injury was a thought, a belief, a knowing, and it is now being at least acknowledged by the American Psychiatric Institute that it's a real thing. And you're going to hear a little bit soon from Emily and myself about how we do suffer moral injury. Some of you are psychiatric survivors. And we will then look at what is this help model. So I'm going to ask Carlito to introduce yourself. And you are a crisis counselor. You talk to people in crisis every single day. And you helped design this help model because it has some of the basic cores of your beliefs and your work. So just talk to us a little bit about what does this mean to you and how does it go into, you know, your service when you're on a crisis call?
Yeah,
And if
thanks,
everybody
Janet.
was like, okay with me, I might just do it. Can you see these slides?
Yeah, we're good.
Yes,
It looks
okay.
like Dr. Olivia Johnson has it set up. So I want to introduce myself, Carlito Cabelin, and my work in the crisis field is with two organizations. The state of New Jersey and Disaster Response Crisis Council. That's where we're employed to the field. A lot of what I could probably is maybe relatable is a lot of the disasters, physical disasters that go out there, whether it's mudslides or wildfires, or here in New Jersey along the coast, there's a lot of storms. So we do deal with grief and loss and people who are in crisis. Now, the other organization, and this is kind of where what I want to get into, is Crisis Text Line. So I'm a crisis counselor, certified crisis counselor on Crisis Text Line. It's an organization where those folks who are in heat or crisis moments or in the hot moment, they come in on a crisis line similar to 988. And to introduce this phrase, it really came from an active rescue response I was brought in on. Of course, the individual came in was already hot in a crisis. They were ready to jump on the train tracks, and what happened was the individual was sort of informing me where they were, why they wanted to jump on the train tracks, and at that point, we flag our supervisors. Our goals are obviously trying to get them to a calm, but we could stay on this slide here just for a second. What does help look like to you, right? So what happened was we had an individual who did not want me to call any of the paramedics or EMT or EMS. And the individual said, if you do, I will jump on the train track. So it took a
Mm,
long while to get around to helping validate the person that what they're going through. And for crisis counselors, we're not here to, obviously we're not here to judge, but we're not here to fix any problems. What we're here is primarily is listening first. And in the listening skill, it's validating that they came in. And for me personally, as a crisis counselor, one of the strengths I see in the world today are people on the crisis lines. And what do I mean by that? Well, the fact that they're there, that they're showing up. A lot of us have moments when we're in a crisis in our mindsets that we kind of feel like, hey, better off dead thoughts, right, are much easier to to think about than it is to go through the pain. So the fact that they show up to me is a huge sign. And what we do as crisis counselors, we validate that. We give them a lot of tentifiers. We understand that, look, taking the courage today and the bravery to raise your hand is huge. Not a lot of people know how to get help, when to get help, or even if to get help. That's sort of a phrase I'm always using. In fact, I was using it this morning at 7 a.m. So individuals who come in, they need to hear things like that. Because if you want to advance forward one slide, Dr. Olivia, I'll show you guys primarily what we're all going through. Okay. So it doesn't matter when or where or what we're going through. I want you to see this image of an iceberg, right? A crisis counselor really works above the waterline. They see all those things that are visible to the naked eye, right? Anger, critical, hostile, violated. Below the waterline, though, are what we call these strongholds. Now, that's not the area we treat. We treat above the waterline. In fact, trauma, whether it's a capital T or a lowercase t, it doesn't really, for us, we're not so concerned to fix that, right? As a crisis counselor, we're here to treat above the waterline. So a lot of times, it's just getting them to a calm. So if you fast forward one slide, we do know that everyone who goes through either big T or lower T, in the moment while they're going through it, they need someone to sort of carry their space with them, hold them in space. They need someone there for them, not to judge how or why they got there, but just to listen first. And for sure, we're not there trying to fix them. We're not trying to work back the issue. That's long-term treatment, right? To work on that below the waterline stronghold. So during the event that I was describing, when an individual was ready to jump off the train tracks and commit suicide, we got the person to a calm, and eventually they were circling. Some people can circle in their emotions. It's rumination. It's racing thoughts, right? It's a negative loop where you can't break it. They kind of need your help, not only to acknowledge that it is real, the emotion, that's what we're really dealing with, but somehow they need a person in the moment to help break that loop, that of negative thoughts or what they're going through. It's just mind racing. So when the individual that I was describing, the case scenario, was going through, ready to jump on the train tracks, my supervisor and I worked the moment to calm, but it still wasn't working. So finally, my supervisor suggested a phrase and a question. And I do recommend this anytime you get to people who are really in an intense heat moment of crisis. And the question simply was, what does help look like to you today?
Mhm.
And the person paused and I paused. I wasn't sure what was going to happen on the other end of the line because at this point, the person was circling. I'm not sure if they're going to jump on the train tracks or not. I was holding my breath. And the individual responded, I just want to know that somebody cares about me. And
Oh,
for me, that was amazing because I think for myself, after I wrapped up the call, we actually got the person to a calm. We called in EMT. They agreed to it. They said yes, I could use some help right now, and I could follow the tracker that the EMT showed up. But I think for me and my notes, my call notes at the end, sort of what revealed to me was I think that's really what we're all looking for today, right? When you see that iceberg analogy of everything above the waterline and then below the waterline, really in the end, do we know or can we find someone who just wants to care about us, right? And in our minds, we're just racing so much that it is valid to think that you are alone. It is valid, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't mean it's true, but it is valid that you feel like you're alone, isolated, and in fact, better off dead's thoughts do sound better, right? And I can attest with that. I felt those thoughts plenty of times too, if I go through my own little T's or big T traumas. So, one more slide forward, and then I'll wrap it up on my piece. Basically, the goals of crisis counselor, and I explained sort of the empathy and the listening first. And again, we're not focused on the individual and the event. We're not focused on how to fix them. We're not focused on any of that. We're only focused on what we see, visually what we see. We just want to get them to a calm, right? And if you think about it, calmness, stable, cool, those are the complete opposites of crisis, duress, stress. And then I like to think, when we see people who are going through mental health challenges, mental health illness, or mental health disorder, I like that term itself. It kind of more reflects with even my own mental health disorder, of whether it's bipolar or borderline personality disorder that I'm diagnosed with. I really like to think of it as what my therapist helps me with is it's just means mental health disorder just means the opposite of disorder is order. That's it, right? So if we reframe ourselves and really help individuals and what they're going through to the naked eye, it could look radically crazy to people who are non-crisis counselors. But crisis counselors, it's just a moment in time. That's it. And building the rapport with individuals is probably the biggest thing we're trying to focus on. Right. Again, I kind of want to allude to this. We're not fixing them. We're not trying to get to the event that caused it and the deep traumas and the strongholds. We're just trying to help rapport build and just like in fact asking their name is a huge question we try to get in there. And then when they respond with a name, we're like, oh, by the way, I'm also Carlito, pleasure to meet you, right? They need to hear things like that. A person, a human being, is on the other end of the line listening. We identify some solutions, but we keep it simple. But once we achieve calm, now we know we can empower them. And what we do as crisis counselors, it's not just a high volume area. It's like, okay, you're good. Let's go, go on to the next one. No, we actually safety plan them. We give them tools. We coach them in on skills that they can use, empower them so that the next time they come into a crisis moment, they're not necessarily calling up the 988 or coming in a crisis text line, or they're frantically looking for a solution. What they're doing is they're also using skills that maybe we coach them on or help them out. And we try to give them resources also in the community. So it very much is a high volume area. But really, if you think about it, it is the opposite of panic, crisis. It really is. In the world, we're destigmatizing what is normal behavior. Let's face it, we all have behavior where we are above the waterline. So what we try to do is just help overall get the person to the calm and then empower them and of course keep them safe. So that really is a viewpoint of from my shoes and my seat when I'm sitting here helping individuals through crisis. And I can hand it over back to you, Janet, for your next
Yeah.
piece.
All right, that's a great lead in. This next step is I will brief on my 911 call in 2005. I will also then introduce Emily on her 988 call in 2023. We'll see some commonalities and we'll see some connections to what Carlito just said on why are we talking about the help model? It is simplistic. I'm going to say you all know this. Everybody on this call, this is not new. But we're trying to promote the most simplistic model that really does help from lived experience. So I'm going to start. Some of you who have been on here before, you've heard my story. You can hear it. You know, if you email me, I'll send you the documentary and process. So I'm going to keep mine simple. But I'm going to start with, I watched a 988 webinar just 2 days ago. Dr. Rupi, I'll send you her information. But in the hour, one of the things she said of all the 988 calls she's been trying to help and support, she actually said something that I related to. She said a lot of the callers, I would be a caller, people who are calling for help, actually found themselves in the position to calm the call taker down or calm the first responder down. Now, I don't know if any of you even relate to that or even could make sense out of that, but that's what I did in 2005. And when I heard this on Dr. Rupi's webinar, I'm like, yes, some of us who are in such extreme stress, if we see the helper in stress, and for me, I was guided by God. I'm like, okay, this isn't working. I need to calm the call taker down so that I can at least survive this scenario. So here's my brief. We're going to use the help model. In 2005, my mother called 911. She called out of fear. She thought I was having a breakdown. And why would she think that? Because 25 years before, I was mislabeled manic depressive in a situational scenario, going through a divorce as a young 20-year-old. And I did have some anxiety, let's say. I was mislabeled then. I was put in a psychiatric institution against my will. We went way past that for 25 years. And in 2005, again, it was situational. I had a second failed business. I was up on Wall Street trying to get myself back, and I had a lot of anxiety. And if you could picture the scenario, I brought all my research to prove my truth to my mother 25 years after I was mislabeled. And she was fearful. She was frightened. She believed in the medical model. It didn't matter what my history of progress was. So instead of using the help model, she did not humble herself. She did not empathize, listen, or have patience. She called 911 and said, help my daughter. Good meaning. What was beautiful, though, is the two police officers that showed up at the doorstep. I would say they did humble themselves. They questioned my mother. They questioned me. They did empathize. They were saying, looks like you got a lot of material out here you're trying to share with your mother. They did listen. But here's like the problem between listening and patience. The police officers that responded to 911 listened to my mother by herself, listened to me by myself. They did not have the patience or the skill or the discipline to bring my mother and myself together and say, what's going on here? Looks like she's got a lot of stuff to share. She just was on Wall Street. She's a single mom. How can we have you two talk together? So for me, the patience would be the piece that I would say, first responders, please help families and friends talk together if you have a 911 call on you. Because I would say the first responders did do, the first three, but in 2005, I don't know the laws, but when I spoke to the first responders and saying this is a mistake, they said we have to take you in anyway. And my understanding is they felt bad. So I am a believer in this model. We do want families, friends to get this before they call 911 or 988. But now in the next moment, I'm going to introduce Emily. And Emily's scenario is similar and very different. Emily called 988 by herself. She didn't have 911 called on her. She called in a moment of distress. She called believing 988 would help her. It's been out. Emily was in a situational, and I like the word situational, doesn't mean you're mentally ill. Emily had a scenario way beyond what we can do today, but you can see her recording describing it. But it was only last year, and Emily is a nationally renowned speaker and advocate for mental health. She has been on television. She's on the speaker circuit. She's on the board of directors of many organizations. And she was on this before this 988 call happened. So just have a perspective, because this woman is a professional. She never thought it was going to happen to her, and she'll show us that it can happen to anyone. And she trusted the 988 system. And I'm not going to say, not that it's all bad, but we need some improvement. And I have asked Emily to do it as simply as possible, because it's a very emotional scenario. It's very painful. And I'm doing this for your sake, Emily. You can listen to Emily's story after, but she's going to be disciplined to give us a very simple view of what happened. What was the situation in 2023? What was the impact when people didn't humble themselves, empathize, listen, and have patience? And what would you have liked to happen? And this is going to literally give you about 3 minutes. So you go and talk. And you have to unmute yourself.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So thank you so much for inviting me to have a space here to share my story, Janet. I wish my story never happens to anyone. So in California, involuntary hospitalization against your will is called a 5150. And so I often tell people that I have been 5150'd by 988, the National Suicide Hotline, where they broke confidentiality when, after I told them that I had seen a security guard, and then they told me to pass my phone to the security guard. That is probably one of my greatest regrets of having interacted with 988. But I was in a moment of feeling very down, and like Janet said, I trusted 988, but that was the last day that I would ever trust 988 ever again. For having 911 called on me, and my local police department showed up, and I interacted with an EMT, from the fire department. They told me to sit next to him on the gurney, and in the video that Janet will be sending out, the link, I shared that, in the beginning, I was given choice. I was given choice to take a pill or not by the EMT, and I was very coherent. But in the end, I basically kind of felt criminalized for crying in public, for expressing that I had any suicidal thoughts. And what I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand is the different levels of suicidal ideation. Because sometimes they're just thoughts, but people don't necessarily act on them, because if a person really wanted to kill themselves, they would not call a number like 988. And my feeling is that most of the people who call 988 are simply looking for someone to just listen and validate. But in my experience before 911 was called on me, the crisis counselor from WellSpace Health, contracted by Vibrant Emotional Health to carry out 988 calls, he did not listen. He talked over me. I can't, I don't even remember how 90 minutes passed by so quickly. I talked about things about Van Gogh. And why wasn't he a person who was appreciated for his art during his time? And who's making money off of his artwork now? And so, like, I feel like I want to be an artist. I am an artist, but I want to be appreciated during my lifetime. And the 988 crisis counselor, he just didn't know how to validate, and he'd talk over me. And so it was a very frustrating conversation.
It was,
Yeah.
and Emily, just to give the simple part, you were
Yes.
brought into the hospital. You were given a pill, you were given a major bill,
Mm-hmm.
and you were not listened to, you were not empathized with, and there was not patience in the process. And you did get out, thank God. So
Yes,
just for this
completely.
tonight, it's you're gonna wrap it up by, you paid a price over some X days, and then you got a bill, and you're
Mhm.
back.
Yes.
So you are still back. If you
Yes.
want to wrap it up as a summary.
Yes. If elder abuse is a crime, patient abuse certainly should be a crime as well. But at this point in time right now, it is not easy for patients to report for abuse in an involuntary hospitalization, because it's just, the system doesn't make it any easier for patients to report abuse. And we have to do that as psychiatric survivors. What psychiatric survivors and rape survivors have in common is no consent was ever required. So
Mm.
we have to speak out. So thank you so much, Janet, for having me here. I think that, for anyone who's been goes through a mental health crisis and they're just crying, I think it's just important for people to just let them cry, let them vent, and just let it out, because that's what somatic processing is all about. So I just felt like we can do better.
We can do better. And thank you for the extreme discipline to do that in such a short version. Carlito, I'm going to actually ask you to respond, also very short, and then
Sure.
Dr. Calvin.
Yep.
But I'm also going to ask participants to either support Emily and what you understand she went through, or questions. So Carlito, again, comment on the help model of what could have worked in that, and then Dr. Calvin.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Emily, for the bravery again, just going through almost, I can feel for you and I hear you out. Could have been re-triggering there, but you did a great job getting through that. Anyways, yes, I think certainly listening and understanding and putting yourself in the person's shoes. And I do want to confirm what Emily said, because I find it also true in my case working, is that sometimes people just need to let it out. And I can actually tell, even on a text network, it's just texting back and forth. Once the person comes in and they're very open and they're kind of vomiting a lot of emotions on the screen, they're just typing away a lot of emotions. I let them get it out. And after they get it out, it's almost cathartic enough where just like, I've had a lot of comments where people have responded on the crisis line and said, just you listening to me right now was what I needed. And so we check in for that. We certainly do on lines. We check in for, are you at a calm now, right? We also want to, make sure there's consent. So unfortunately, by all stretch of means, there's not everything is perfect, and people certainly have faults. So I just want to again thank Emily for going through that in a very courageous way without being re-triggered so much. So thank you.
Yes, yes. And keep in mind, it was literally only last year. So thank you for that. And Dr. Chatlos, I'm going to ask you to respond. And, if you can lean into, if you were the MD, on the ER receiving Emily, and how would you use the help model to just even understand, like she's driven into your hospital. You don't know if she's has consent or not. I don't know. How would you use the help model if you were the MD on the ER?
And you just said the word understand. I was just listening to this discussion and thinking a person in crisis is very vulnerable. They're intense emotional, they're vulnerable. And one of the most damaging things with a vulnerable person is to be misunderstood. And often it's the misunderstanding that ends up having the hurt, the stigma, the moral injury. So the help model, that I would say the real goal is, what do I need to do so that I can understand what's going on with that person? I don't want to immediately jump to a diagnosis or a treatment. I need to first understand. Then, with understanding, I think Emily was very smart. Consent. Everything along the way has to be, okay, here's what we think is going on. Here's what we're recommending. There really does have to be consent. There has to be an alliance in order to help someone. If we're forcing something, if they're not engaged and along with us, then it's not going to work very well. And using the help model, especially the empathy, what can we do to help them see the options and make consent? And I think those are the main things. It truly is, to a person in crisis, it truly is an emotional, a moral injury to be misdiagnosed, to be misunderstood. And as Emily said, it's like, well, I never want to use their help again. And we really want to help. So I think the key, do what we need to until we can understand where they are and what's going
Yes.
on.
One more question, because this in general, people have not heard this from this psychiatric institution, and you represent all of APA right now. What is the prognosis, or what is the trajectory when someone is not dignified, is not acknowledged with humbleness, empathy, listening, and patience? What is the longevity of their recovery? And then because you've seen people who move through recovery, what either has happened or do you assume happens as a psychiatrist when people get these basics, these real simples? What's the difference?
It can be huge. In fact, it can actually make the difference between success or failure. A misdiagnosis, a misunderstanding, a misalliance in terms of not developing a therapeutic alliance, forcing without consent, you then have an adversarial relationship rather than a cooperative therapeutic relationship. And once there is an adversarial relationship, it could be anyone's call as to what the trajectory is, but I do know that it's not going to be terribly successful. There has to be some understanding, some consent, and a therapeutic alliance for success with any of these interventions.
Thank you. We're going to come back to that because that is the essence of we want to shorten the recovery, shorten the damage and the trauma, shorten the moral injury. When you can look at a simplistic model like this, that if friends and family, Dr. Chatlos, couldn't do this before they call 911, we can prevent it. If when there's co-response, you know, police officers and social workers are the peers and the social workers can probably do this better than the police officers because they have to do safety first. We believe in that. Safety first. But when there's a co-response model, this can happen, and it's possible people don't have to be put in the hospital always, right? You're a prescribing psychiatrist. You do not believe that medication or hospitalization has to happen on all accounts, correct?
Absolutely. And I think the Rob Wypond in his book, and several books that are coming up, is there are way too many hospitalizations, forced hospitalizations than are necessary. And the success really is not good. It prolongs many of these people, especially the ones calling a 988 line rather than 911. They don't need police. They don't need a hospitalization, but we do need to connect them with resources. They need to have different types of resources so that they can have a success. And the recovery is often short and smooth if we start with that understanding.
So I'm going to start looking at chats. Carlito, Dr. Olivia, if you want to chime in, I do want to see if we have questions here, but maybe Dr. Olivia, if you want to comment, because you've seen us go through this in stages. Why don't you comment first, and we'll see if we can have some other people on it.
I'm not sure that I have any comments. I was really, Emily just kind of floored me, but I can't say that I'm actually surprised. I've actually heard some stories and have actually seen a couple things happen with 988. So, it's definitely something that's concerning for me on my end. And I think that, again, we have to educate ourselves. And I think what you guys are doing is so needed. And I think people have got to really take all this in and really, think about the lasting effects that they have on other people. And we don't have to know exactly what they're going through. And like Carlito said, we don't have to know the big T and the little T that caused this. We have to get them kind of stabilized in the moment and kind of get them back to center for a second. And we don't want them jumping out of the water, and we don't want them drowning. We want them treading water and kind of get them back to stable and realizing that not everything is dramatic in the moment. And I think too many people right now are struggling, and I feel really bad, but I think the movement that's happening right now is so needed. And I think if we can educate families and coworkers and friends, we're not going to have as many people calling these numbers in crisis in the numbers that we have right now, which is the issue.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
and
think
that is said by a former police officer speaking. So I see Scott's coming on visually. If you had a question, please unmute yourself. So anybody else? Carlito and Calvin, I might ask you to watch the chat so we do get to
Sure.
questions
Yep.
or comments. Scott, did you want to comment? Go ahead. Yeah, unmute yourself, please.
Oh, he's trying to find the mute button.
Working on it.
While he's trying to find the mute button, I really want to echo what Dr. Olivia Johnson said. I think, oh, there we go. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, no, Olivia hit it on the head. I mean, coping skills.
Yeah.
If we could start getting this stuff in the high schools, in colleges, middle schools, and teach them young. Emily, man, your call back in 2014, I called the suicide hotline, a national one, 12 times, nobody answered. 3 other helplines set up for first responders. They were no longer in service, lost funding. Nobody answered. The line was not inoperable. I called a police officer, a friend of mine, said, "Hey, can you come out?" This is after my suicide attempt. I found out I had PTSD on Google search. And then I started reaching out for help. police officer says, Scott, I'm gonna come pick you up and take you to the hospital. It's like, can you just come up and we just talk? No, policy was take you right straight to the hospital, and these are emergency nurses that I know. I was a firefighter, and it's like, I'm not doing that. And I almost blew myself up in a shop. But I ended up calling another national hotline, and the first firefighter said on the other end of the line from East Coast, talking to a Minnesota firefighter, Scott, we've got you. We're gonna get
Aw,
this. And he knew about PTSD, he knew about addiction, he knew about suicide. He has helped other first responders, and that's what we need. Just like Safe Call Now, you know, other first responders helping first responders, peer support. And I mean, because this 988, I warn people. I shouldn't say warn people. I just tell people, okay, here's what to expect if you call 988. It's a 31-second automated phone call. They're going to be asking you 3 questions, because some of those questions might piss people off, at least around North Dakota. And then if I'm out in the East Coast or somewhere and I call, it comes right back to North Dakota. Well, that doesn't do me any good if I'm somewhere else. But they're changing that now. I know that I wish they would just answer it in person, because that's so important to talk to a human being. 31 seconds is a long time when you're suicidal.
thank you, Scott. And please stay in touch with us. I appreciate you came on live. Is there anyone else that would like to at least comment on what we've said so far or ask a question? And again, I'll have Carlito, you know, if you want to raise something that came in. Because
One
in a
thing
few
that I
minutes- yeah.
want to make, yeah, Emily did comment about warm lines. I do agree with that also, and I've been on warm lines as a volunteer myself. And again, what I was echoing Dr. Olivia Johnson, is lived experience peer supports are probably the most empathetic people, because they've been there before. So I could see somebody like Scott being on the other side of exact peer fire department to fire department warm line with other individuals in his peer group, helping them out also. We all have opportunity. Like, pain will never be wasted if we use that experience to help other people, right? So that's my experience of the community that I'm in on my side, where I see a lot of volunteers who come in on the peer lines, sorry, the 911, 988 or hotlines, is amongst that population. As you know, the peer lived experience person is probably your most opportune moment to get someone who has strong listening ears. So and of course I'm echoing that, you know, obviously every system's not perfect. And unfortunately, yes, I do hear you also on the wait times, and in a way that's reflective also of the amount of demand of how people are in crisis, and the lack of supply of quality volunteers who are trying to help on those lines too. So that's kind of a macro
Right.
bird's eye view that I can comment on. But anyways, yeah, thank you, Emily, for mentioning warm lines made up of peer lived experience individuals.
Yes. And I want to check into Glinda's comment, because she related to, you know, her mother calling 911. And part of our moving forward, which we'll do in a moment, I'm really motivated to get this out to mainstream human beings, not the 911 and 988 first responders. Take the burden off there. I want to get it to family and friends, so that they get how to do HELP before they're calling. And so that literally we can have conversation. If we could just have a conversation, you know, it's not always the case if there's danger to self or other, but there could be a fair amount of situations where we can just learn how to de-escalate within a family. And even if a first responder comes, there are models where first responders can actually sit with the family and get the family to talk with each other, and possibly prevent from going to a hospital. So Glenda, you're welcome to talk, although I thank you for your comment. Others, and Dr. Chatlos, you can always chime in here if you want to, but I want to make sure we get to anybody's comment or
Yeah.
question. Peer support, yes. So do we see if, because I know we only have a few more minutes, I will do a wrap up of where we're going to go.
There's a
boots on-
hand
go ahead.
raised. There's a
Go
hand
ahead.
raised.
Oh,
Andrea.
Andrea, yes, Andrea, please
Hello, can you hear
talk
me?
to us. Yes,
Hi. Yes. So I haven't gone through 988. I actually just learned of 988 recently. I had a friend who went through 988, actually, and I had my own crisis. And I remember one of the reasons that I was so hesitant to reach out was perhaps a cultural aspect where we hold our pain in, and we don't really talk about mental health. It's, as a child of immigrant parents, struggle and crisis are pretty much in our blood, and we're taught that this is part of the human experience. But when one has a crisis, we don't really know how to respond to it either. I think our motto has always been hold it and power through. And so when I was dealing with my own crisis, I remember trying to adopt that mentality, even at ignoring the points of where I didn't even realize that I was in crisis. I was not eating, I was not sleeping, I was having 5 panic attacks a day that I didn't even realize were panic attacks. I just thought this was just stress. But if you're laying on the floor and you can't move, you've gotten to the point of panic that you're immobilized, that you're completely immobilized, that your body is essentially saying enough, and your brain is saying, no, you must move forward. And you've taught yourself, you have this internal narrative that you're not doing enough. I believe that it is crucial that there should be education within our own immediate circle of how to spot a crisis or an oncoming crisis or the signs of it, knowing how your baseline, knowing your friends' baselines, and even opening up that space to say, hey, I'm here to listen. I'm here to hold space for you. I'm not trying to solve your problem. There is no problem really in the sense. It's more of a, I'm here to help you work through it. Getting that community support as well, knowing that you have other people who've lived your experience, because unfortunately with the mental health community, and this is something I saw with my friends experience and that I was part of, is that there's an immediate rush to diagnose, to put a name to it, and to control it.
Yes.
Whereas like most of us might not need that. Recovery, we're always in recovery, I feel, but it is about learning about how we can jump back from those moments where we fall. And I just wanted to share that because I saw the other avenue of somebody who was 5150'd. Yeah, I love Emily's drawing.
Yes.
It's like I saw the other hold. It was like somebody who reached out for help, and they called in, and they received a police going to their door, put in, was not in a sober state, and was voluntarily held. And I use the quotations because that person did not even remember signing anything over or was not in state to consent. And then being denied any modicum of comfort, no snacks, can't visit somebody and bring snacks to them. They can't hold that. No ability to reach out to loved ones during certain hours. We don't know what mental health really looks like for any person, but even just having that access to communication or just comfort, small comforts, is crucial. Creating that environment to recovery. And I just saw it as so sterilized. There was a lack of empathy. It was just going through the motions and checking off boxes.
There we go. Andrea, we should talk after, so please find me on the email. We'll show it in a moment. Please follow up with Emily. Hopefully there were connections that have made here. We do believe we are going to do 4 and 8-hour training programs on this. Today was just another step that Dr. Olivia supported us on to wake it up. We welcome conversations about becoming an aware ambassador, specifically around the religious and spiritual experience. It is very well known now that there's a very strong connection between spiritual and religious support in mental health. So ask us about that. Follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. We are very specifically in the next month going to do this kind of program to mobile crisis units in New Jersey. And if any of you have any connection where we can help mobile crisis units or arrive, co-response teams or police departments across the United States, we are ready to do it. We do have a docuseries that is in process to be launched. So people with experience, I think we can even stop the share at this point. So anyone that wants to find us, please find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or email. And I think we'll stop the share here. And we do like to close on time, but if there are any other questions or comments, Olivia, can we stay a few more minutes or should we just do that as follow-up?
We should probably wrap it up here in a minute. You guys can probably stay on, but I have to go because I have a few more meetings I have to get on.
Okay.
I just wanted to say in the link, I just added it again, guys. There's a certificate for today. You have to click on it and get that. And then next month in December, the 6th, our next First Responder Friday is how to navigate negative childhood experiences and how they impact you as an adult. That'll be with Dr. Mendy Keats. So be sure to get back with us for that. Did you guys have anything else to add, Janet, before I wrap up? And there will be a recording of this as well. And when that comes out, we can send that out to everybody.
I'm good. It's the best we can do with an hour. I thank everybody that showed up, and I would say, to respect the timing here, find us on Facebook and LinkedIn and email, and let's continue the conversation because we are moving forward with boots on the ground to get this to first responders. That good, Calvin, Carlito?
Yes, no, very good.
Excellent. Excellent.
Everything's covered.
This
We're
was
good.
great.
Thank you all for
Thank you,
listening
guys.
and participating.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. This was great.